Welcome to the Hockey Writers Maple Leafs Lounge, a weekly show from our Toronto Maple Leafs writing crew, bringing you the latest news, rumors, trades, player grades, prospects, and much more. From training camp to the playoffs, from draft day to the trade deadline, our team covers everything that happens with the blue and white. Come on in and pull up a chair. Welcome to the Maple Leafs Lounge.
Hello and welcome back to the Maple Leafs Lounge. I am your host, Peter Baracchini, and as always, I'm joined by my colleague and fellow Maple Leaf writer over at the Hockey Writers, Shane Seney. Shane, another eventful week with the Maple Leafs, never a dull moment, even during the offseason. But before we get into some big news, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing great. Recovery's still going okay. So, can't really do too much as far as the S's go, but no, I'm feeling better. Golf game's getting back into shape here, and the draft's coming up in free agency, so it's going to be great.
Glad to hear the recovery is still going well with you, because I would not imagine how painful that jaw surgery would be, because I'm just glad that you're doing okay. You're on the path to recovery, and then you're back here talking Maple Leafs. And why not get into it? Why not get into the biggest news of the week? Kind of the secret / not so secret news. Brad Treliving was formally announced as the new general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs. It was always speculating that he was going to be the front runner. There were other names creeping in, underrated names as well. But as we talked last week, he appeared to be the front runner. He is their guy now. They had the press conference late last week. I just want to get your thoughts on his press conference and what stood out to you during his chat with the media.
Yeah, he was saying all the right things. I mean, I was a little bit skeptical. I think we talked about in our last episode just over a couple of things, but honestly, I thought the press conference went as good as it could. He kind of left that impression that he's going to really evaluate the whole team, and it's not just about the core four. And he had a couple of quotes that were really pulled out, of course, but I was really impressed with his demeanor, his, how much he kind of acknowledged that it's the Leafs and it means something. So, overall, I thought it was a great press conference, and I thought the vibe was pretty good with how he left. Because of all the emotions that everybody went through these last 2 weeks. So, no, all in all, I thought Treliving's first minutes as Maple Leafs GM couldn't have gone any better.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more that, he seemed like he was up for the task and he was motivated to get what needed to get done for this team. And obviously, we're going to talk about a few talking points from his press conference. Obviously, the biggest one and the number one topic that is on everyone's mind is Auston Matthews heading into his final year of his contract. Obviously, he can't sign a new one until July 1st. Everyone seems to be so in a panic about that, but relax. It's just the way things work out. But Treliving did say that is a priority. Going in, he's already had talks with Matthews. How confident are you that, both sides are talking, both sides seem to be on the same page? Are you hopeful that, come July 1st or even before the start of next season, that a deal does get done with Matthews with Treliving as the GM?
100%. I see a deal being done sometime this summer. 3 or 5 year deal by the sounds of it from everything that I've gathered online. I think Matthews is here to stay, and I think Treliving knows that this team runs through him. It's not the captain. It's not Mitch Marner, who's, has himself some fine seasons, but this team is Auston Matthews' team, and they'll go as far as he can take them. So I have no worries about that. I released an article this week or last week now just about how I feel he's not going anywhere, and the panic and trade rumors to LA and all this crap, really, if you ask me, I can go by the wayside, because Matthews wants to be here. He's a legacy player. He cares about the Maple Leafs records. He cares about the team, the city. He loves it here. So end of the day, the deal is going to get done. And to be honest, like Treliving's kind of walking into a layup as his first like major transaction because because the player wants to be here. So get the deal done. He doesn't have to, go too hard with the negotiations. He's going to be one of the top two paid players in the league. So it's really shouldn't be too hard to get the deal done. And with his willingness to go to Arizona and build that relationship already, just hearing that is a great sign. So I'm really excited because Matthews he's the guy. He's the franchise.
Yeah, and it's interesting to point out that you just mentioned that obviously there's already talks that he is going back to meet with Matthews, and he already has that relationship with Matthews' agent, Judd Moldaver. So the fact that they are kind of on the same page is a good sign. And you mentioned 3-5 years. I know that's not going to sit well with fans. Obviously, I think the big goal here is trying to get that max 8-year deal to try and keep him in the long term. Again, it all depends on how Treliving approaches everything. But then again, everyone is going to point to the fact that he could not sign Gaudreau long term. He couldn't get Matthew Tkachuk under contract as well. But both players were in different situations. Obviously, it kind of seemed like Johnny Gaudreau was inching towards free agency. It sounded like he was testing the market no matter what. Tkachuk had all the leverage because, he was still an RFA and he didn't want to stay in Florida. Guess maybe something was on the same page. I guess he knew something about the coaching issues that kind of plagued the team this year as well. And then he went over to Florida, and now look at him playing well. So Treliving was in a good spot, or in a difficult spot, but he made the most in trying to get assets back for Matthew Tkachuk. With Huberdeau didn't have a great year, but Mackenzie Weegar is looking to be a bright spot as well. So he's not afraid to make tough decisions. And you know what? The fact that he's in that same spot again with another superstar, I think he's going to get it done. I'm hopeful that it is, more than 6 years. Even if it's 7, I'd rather take that than 8 years and then reevaluate everything after that. But then again, Matthew said he wants to be a Maple Leaf for a long time. We've heard the difference in terms of saying, I love being here, or I don't want to play anywhere else. I want to be here. The tone shows his commitment to this. And I agree that hopefully Treliving is able to get it done and sooner than later. And I do think that hopefully, they're going to be on the same page, because it seems like everybody is inching towards that common goal right now.
Yeah, and I think the salary cap going up might be the only hindering point here. There's a little bit of unknown with that with the next couple of years. So I don't know if there's going to be a lot of 7 or 8 year contracts handed out this year just because of that. So I could see some players and agents really just taking that 3-year deal or 4-year deal and seeing where the cap lands, because there's rumors that it could go up as much as $5 million in the next 3 years. So if it goes up, that means salaries are going up. And of course, they say it's not about the money, but at the end of the day, it's always about the money.
Absolutely. And this, just one quick note, there's also a tweet of Jim Treliving going viral about him congratulating his son on the GM job. So you can tell that the Trelivings definitely have the passion, and hopefully that they're going to work wonders with this team. Speaking of wonders, the big thing is about the core 4, trying to keep that intact. But this is the biggest standout for me because Treliving had the best comment in regards to the core 4. I'm just going to read it off. This is from Luke Fox in his write-up about Brad Treliving. My job is to protect them, right? It's to protect them, and I'm fiercely protective of my players, but this can't be about the core 4. This is about the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's not about 4 players or 2 guys or 1 guy. It's about 23 guys that we're going to have in this organization. That, to me, before I give my thoughts, Shane, I want to get your take on that comment alone and how he's elaborating that this shouldn't just be about 4 players. It should be a team mentality, just like what we're seeing in the playoffs with teams in the finals, like the Golden Knights and the Florida Panthers, how they're buying into that team mentality. And it's not just about one singular player.
Right. And as far as the core 4 goes, that's a media thing. That's not a dressing room thing. That's not a player's thing. So those guys don't think like that anyway. So what he's doing is just trying to kill the narrative come in here, let's talk about something else besides these four guys. Cause like Morgan Riley must just sit there and be like, hey, like, hello, I'm over here too, right? So he doesn't get thrown into the conversation half the time. And we saw in the playoffs how good of a player he can be for this team. So I love what Treliving did. He's trying to just come in. Let's talk about the team. It's all about the Leafs. It's important. He really showed that, that desire and that will to really jump into the family kind of thing. So I loved it. I loved how he really trying to pull that attention away from the four guys with, that are supposed to be putting up the points because they're making, some of them are making the most money on the team. So again, I was a fan of it by all means.
With that comment, obviously it comes with the undertone that if he needs to make a big move and move on from one of those players, ultimately probably going to come down to Mitch Marner or William Nylander. Do you think that he's not afraid to make that kind of deal, just like he did with Tkachuk, to try and bring pieces back?
For sure. I think you'll get a feel of where Nylander sits as far as the AAV goes. And then I think he'll probably circle him as the guy, really, unless he's going to wait it out and see. And just, if he can wait out that Tavares contract, then he doesn't have to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll depend on what the results are these next year and a half. But ideally, I would just wait it out, get Tavares off the books, re-sign Marner. And I mean, if you can get Johnny back at like a much, much lower cap number, which if anybody's going to take a hometown discount, it feels like he would. So, it's not the most ideal situation right now, but give it a couple of years here. And if they keep them together, who knows? They can really kind of maneuver the finances. But if it comes down to moving one of those guys in the next 18 months, it's William Nylander.
Yeah, and I wanted to get your take on that because that was the biggest thing for me, because the way that he said that, it seemed like, even like the way that Dubas said that he's not going to be playing the status quo in terms of keeping the core four intact. If he needed to move somebody, he would. And Treliving is following that same ideology or path, that if something presents itself where he does need to move one of these players, I agree that it probably would be Nylander, although I don't, because he's come up clutch at certain points. I would love to see Marner maybe possibly be that guy. But then again, Selke Trophy nominee, almost 100 points again. But then again, it kind of went quiet when Nylander started to rise up. So you have that, pros and cons for moving each player at this point. But the fact that he's not afraid to try and, shake things up like he did with Calgary, because he got two tremendous pieces back for Tkachuk. If he's able to do the same with a Marner or Nylander trade, I definitely think, you're going to have some backlash, but you could see a big time payoff if you have the coach to try and play to their strengths. I don't think, obviously, we heard what happened with the Flames and players sending in trade contracts and rescinding them after Sutter left. I think there might be a different situation with Keefe, although he has been, kind of stubborn with his lineup in the past. Hopefully he's able to play their strengths just like he has with other players in the lineup. But I do think that, the way that he said that this isn't about the core four, he's going to do what's best for the team kind of thing. And I think that's what really stood out, that, he would love to keep them there, but if something arises, you could rest assured that he's not going to be afraid to try and pull the trigger on a move.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Moving away from the GM, and I just briefly touched up on Sheldon Keefe, it seems like there's the possibility that there could be a contract extension in the works. Obviously, he's in the final year right now, but should things go according to plan and things work out, obviously a contract extension isn't out of the works or isn't out of the question. There was a report from David Alter who mentioned Elliot Friedman saying that they have met to discuss the coach's future as well. I'm obviously, a lot of people or a lot of fans were hoping that maybe Sheldon Keefe would probably be the one to go and maybe Kyle Dubas would stay on. I probably was one of those people that thought that, because I thought Dubas did a great job. Maybe Sheldon Keefe was out coached at certain points in the playoffs. How do you feel about this news of a possible extension? And given other names in the coaching market, is there one that you are probably leaning towards if there was a coaching change?
That's a good question. As far as Keefe goes, it does sound like they're going to get an extension done, which is like a complete 180 from what we were hearing, towards the end of, or I should say the end of last season. So I know they don't want him to be a lame duck coach this year. So I could just see it being a 1-year extension, kind of show me, prove me that, prove me right kind of thing, or prove me wrong. So Treliving kind of made a point too, is he inherited Bob Hartley with the Flames, who was coach of the year. And then all he did the next year was he gassed him after a bad year, right? So he's not afraid to make a change, and he's not afraid to take on somebody else's coach per se, right? So I think Keefe's going to stay, and I'm with you. I'm a fan of his, but I do think there was times where it's just like, why are they tinkering with the lineup again? Like, why? Why is, like, no chemistry come game 2 of the second round? Like, doesn't make any sense. So those kind of things where he just needs to stick with something that he likes and kind of limit the adjustments, because like Mike Babcock, he would get in his way a little bit. So as far as coaches go, I'm a big Gerard Gallant fan. I've always liked him. I think he's kind of got that hard-nosed East Coast mentality where he's, he just wants you to work hard. He's not really going to, take away your creativeness or those kind of things, I find, but he's just a good communicator and can really push teams. I don't know if he's necessarily the perfect voice, but he'd be somebody that I'd watch for. Peter Laviolette, he's still available too, right? So he's got a resume that's, long and decorated. So those two guys would probably be two guys that would stick out for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, it's hard not to go against, the kind of track record that they've had. But I personally, I was hoping that if there was a coaching change, they would probably go with Andrew Burnett. But then again, he's going over to Nashville, and Barry Trotz, he's already making his statement there, bringing in a coach that worked wonders with the Florida Panthers team last season. I do think that this might be I agree that maybe one more year after this, they could try and get something done with Sheldon Keefe. But he has 2 more years to try and prove himself and show that he is able to adapt, because he got out coached in, every single playoff series up until this point. And even in the second round, he got out coached, and he had no answer to try and counteract the Florida Panthers. And that to me kind of sounds like a problem. And he is definitely a good coach. He has shown to make good choices mid-game during the regular season and work to his advantage. But for some reason, it just doesn't quite work out in the playoffs. I don't know, because he has made the same moves, but then again, with the personnel that he has, it's good enough for the regular season. It's not good enough for the playoffs. Kerfoot in the top 6, Justin Hall in the top 4. You can't live by those decisions consistently in the playoffs and hope to get a result when it's a different result in the regular season, because things change, and just seems like those players weren't kind of cut up for the task at hand to try and elevate their play when it mattered most. I do think that maybe you still keep him on board, because, he's had success at every single level that he's coached in. Junior, he has an AHL championship as well with Dubas. So hopefully maybe Treliving, he did speak highly of him. Hopefully that there is that common ground with him, that they could try and work towards something, that he could put together a team that he can coach. And then that way it works everything out, where he's not scrambling with pieces that may or may not work out. Before we jump into the second half of our show, here is a quick word from the Hockey Writers.
Interested in writing for the Hockey Writers? If you have experience writing about hockey, are passionate about the sport, and are looking to take your writing to the next level, the Hockey Writers could be the place for you. Here at THW, you will have the opportunity to hone your craft at one of the world's largest and most respected hockey publishers. You will have control over what you write, be able to seek out media credentials, and be supported by a large network of writers and editors. Plus, you'll get paid for doing it. If you're interested and want to know more about team openings and requirements, please visit the Write for THW page on the Hockey Writers website. A link to that page is also listed in the description.
And we are back with the Maple Leafs Lounge. As we talked about, the front office, the bench, let's talk about, a potential big name in the trade market out there. Obviously, the Maple Leafs goaltending had some questions coming in. Ilya Samsonov looked great, shaky at times in the playoffs, but rose to the occasion. Matt Murray, same thing, but injuries got the best of him. Inconsistent, didn't quite work out as many had hoped for, hoping that he would try and turn the page. But there is a report from Frank Saravalli where he's already compiling his list of summer trade targets. And obviously the Winnipeg Jets are a big one with the likes of Mark Scheifele, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and the big one is Connor Hellebuyck, and he has linked teams like the Los Angeles Kings, New Jersey Devils, Ottawa Senators, Carolina Hurricanes, Pittsburgh Penguins, Vegas Golden Knights, although I don't know what assets they have to try and trade at this point. But the big one, obviously, here on the show, we are a Maple Leafs show. The Toronto Maple Leafs are a target for Connor Hellebuyck. Shane, given how well Samsonov has played this season, and even with the emergence of Joseph Woll, do you try and go back to this tandem for a full, evaluation next season? Or do you try and put your best deal forward or best offer forward for Connor Hellebuyck, who is a Vezina Trophy winner? Yeah, he's getting up there in age, but he's had a heavy workload. The Winnipeg Jets have not been a very good defensive team, and he's been standing on his head for quite some time. Do you give him that opportunity on a better Maple Leafs team that has a little bit more structure on the back end?
Yeah, I think you do your homework and you see what, Cheveldayoff's looking as far as an offer goes. But do I necessarily think every team needs them. I shouldn't say it like that. But do I overpay for them? Not necessarily, no, because Samsonov's going to get like what, 3.5 to 4.5 million per season for probably a 2 to 3 year deal. Mm-hmm. You got Joseph Woll at 766 for the next 2 years. So you're going to have a tandem that is capable under, 6 million, which is, less than what Hellebuyck makes anyway. And plus he's going to want an extension at probably 8 per. So you're going to have to pay him. So it's risky because that contract extension is, the next load of business that comes after it. And considering that there's already the Matthews and Nylander to worry about, and there's going to be Tavares and Marner, among others, then, it almost makes it like it's just too much uncertainty. So I think they'll stay away. It just seems like Hellebuyck got linked to everybody. So, as far as an actual target goes, I don't know. I could maybe see Carolina trying to make a splash or something, but I just don't see the Leafs going there.
Ideally, or like when you're playing armchair GM, it kind of does make sense because in a sense that, yeah, Samsonov looked great this season. Joseph Woll looked great. Obviously, I think the Maple Leafs are going to go that route. It is the cheaper option for them to try and sign Samsonov. I believe his, price tag for a qualifying offer as a restricted free agent, I think is only $2 million. And I think they could easily kind of match that. Mm-hmm. Joseph Woll had a promising stretch down in the second half when he came up and he looked comfortable taking over as goaltender in the playoffs. Rough spot to come in, but he looked very good in the games that he played for the Maple Leafs. And I wonder if maybe that is kind of in the back of their minds because, Connor Hellebuyck is a hell of a goalie. There's no doubt about that. Like I mentioned, he won a Vezina Trophy for a reason. I do think that because the Maple Leafs have been on the receiving end of getting goalied so many times in the past playoffs, maybe you have a goalie. That's why I mentioned the Maple Leafs are a better structured team where they can alleviate some of that, the shots against that Hellebuyck may face on a nightly basis could help them out in the long run where maybe they're not overstrenuating him with like 30 plus shots a game. And maybe he's rested up. You lower his starts as well, make him fresh for the playoffs so that he can go the distance where you maybe have Samsonov or Woll as, your 1, 2, 3 right there.
Yeah.
But I do think that, it is becoming a little bit tough because Woll has shown that he's way past the AHL limit. I think he's battling for that number 1 spot as well. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting debate because he would be a goalie to goalie a team, just like the Maple Leafs have been goalied so many times in the playoffs. And given the back end that they have with some a little bit more reliable names and more consistency, I think that would help out with Hellebuyck. But I do agree that, Samsonov and Wall is the more likely tandem than anything. And yeah, if you are looking at, Hellebuyck, you are probably going to offer up a Mitch Marner, William Nylander to try and get more him as well as more in return as well, because both are elite players. You're not going to let him go for just a one-on-one. You're going to want something more in return as well.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on to our final topic, obviously with the offseason just around the corner after the Stanley Cup playoffs, the NHL draft is just slowly creeping up. And Shane, I know you're not, I know you mentioned off the show that you're more of a baseball scout and analyst than a hockey one, but obviously, we've known the draft strategy for the Maple Leafs the past few seasons. Obviously, Dubas is not there. Treliving's not even going to be in Nashville because of the contract issues or contract problem with him going there with another team. Obviously the Maple Leafs have had their strategies in the past, going in, taking best players available, trading picks down. Obviously they have a first rounder this time around. The big question is, do they trade that pick to select a player or a prospect within the range that they're in that, 27, 28 range where the pick is finalized? Or do they try and trade it and get more picks because they only have 3 this time around, and they had 3 back in 2021 where they selected Matthew Knies?
Yeah, I mean, I could see Treliving moving, or I mean, indirectly moving it, just because he never really talked about building from the youth, or there was no future movement. Everything was about the core and winning now, and very much a Stanley Cup or bust vibe. So when that's the case, I mean, I know he's not there, but he's basically going to be there because they'll be communicating to him on the minute. So if there's some talk about certain names becoming available, like a Mark Scheifele or something, where it's a first round pick and a top prospect, I think he'll consider something like that. So I think the pick will be in play as far as getting back either, somebody they can plug and play in their top 6 or top 4D, or they could, move it down and get a second and maybe 2 seconds and a third, who knows? But I definitely think the pick will be in play.
Yeah, and absolutely. Obviously, when you're trying to get an impact player, whether up front or on defense, you got to try and package that pick up. Obviously, this is going to be for a different reason and not using it to try and shed some salary, just like they did with the Peter Mrazek contract last year. I was in Montreal hoping that, okay, I wonder who the Maple Leafs are going to take. Are they going to take Owen Beck? Are they going to take a Philip Meshar? And then as soon as I didn't hear anything, I'm like, they probably traded away that pick. And lo and behold, they traded away that pick to Chicago to get Peter Mrazek off their hands. Got the second round pick for Fraser Minton. I do think that the trade is going to be a little bit different this time around. Also, I do think that if there is a name that they want in the first round that maybe gets taken, or maybe a name that they for sure is going to fall into the second, maybe I can see them trying to take a second round pick and even another one late in the second or even early third. We know what happened with that second round pick with the Ottawa Senators, where they got Topi Niemela and Ronnie Hirvonen with those 2 picks that they traded down for. So the trading down has been, again, former GM Kyle Dubas as well, his plan, but also something that the Maple Leafs can do to try and accrue more picks. And I think that's going to be important later on in the draft, or even when we get closer to the NHL draft to see what can happen.
For sure. I just hope whatever they do, if they do move a pick and, accumulate a couple others, that they don't land behind the Pittsburgh Penguins, because whoever they want to select, the Leafs want to select, Kyle Dubas is going to pick that player. And just to fuel the rivalry, because Without a doubt, there's a newfound, management rivalry between these two clubs. And I really think that they'll battle it out for some of those same players. And I was kind of surprised to see that Dubas did get permission to be at the draft table with the Penguins because, he's pretty heavily involved with that stuff. So considering where he left off with Toronto, I really see him trying to, do whatever he can to ruffle the feathers.
Yeah, and I got a top 5 picks or with that selection in the works. And I'm still basing it off the fact that, because we've known Kyle Dubas for so long, I'm basing it off of that because you're going to have some people still around from the Dubas era being a part of this draft. And one quick note, there was one more point that I completely forgot to mention that we talked about before the show. I had it in my notes, and for some reason, I totally lost track of it. But this is a perfect segue because we were talking about Kyle Dubas. Shane, you have a piece coming out or is already out about players that could be on the move, and Kyle Dubas, because he's familiar with a lot of these players on this team, could become Pittsburgh Penguins. Who is at the top of your list, and how likely is it that, Kyle Dubas sweeps in and takes advantage and reacquires players that he's known in the past?
Yeah, the thing is the Penguins have like over 20 million in cap space, and they could be moving out some more money. So he's going to have a lot of resources this summer. So one player that stands out above the rest is Noel Acciari. Dubas has tried to acquire him for 3 different seasons because they've played Acciari in 3 straight years in the playoffs, and he was a beast. So they really had him on the radar, and he fits perfectly with what the Penguins need as a third line center that checks and kind of, really keeps opponents on their toes and likes to muck it up. So I see him being probably the number 1 target as far as the 5 that I mentioned in the article, as far as, at least that were on the team last year. 2 other names to, consider too: Frederick Anderson. Tristan Jarry is a free agent, so there's talks that he might not be coming back. He's going to evaluate that. So Freddie might end up back there. We'll see how that relationship ended when he, of course, Jack Campbell was picked ahead of him, and Peter Mrazek for that matter. And another name that I just thought of too is Connor Brown. So Connor Brown is someone coming off a major surgery. The Penguins are looking for speed. He's going to get a one year, $1 million contract kind of thing just to show me. So it's probably going to be, he'll be on their radar, but as far as lease from last season, it's Noel Acciari at the top of the list for sure.
I hate that you brought up Noel Acciari right then and there because he's one player that I still want the Maple Leafs to retain and keep on hand, but it totally makes sense. It totally makes sense. That's why he got him in that Ryan O'Reilly deal because, he has been a thorn in the sides for the Maple Leafs with the Boston Bruins in the past. I mean, we're very familiar with that. It's interesting that you brought up Connor Brown because he has been lights out good with the Ottawa Senators until the injury occurred, and he's been very energetic, tenacious. We saw that in the first few seasons with the Maple Leafs before we had to get rid of him and shed contract because other names are coming up for a new deal. And I wondered if obviously that was a move that he didn't want to make. Obviously with him and the Nikita Zaitsev contract as well, he needed to offload that. And I think maybe Connor Brown was just the additional piece. And now that he has a fresh start, maybe he does go after Connor Brown. It does make a whole lot of sense because he improved tremendously from juniors to his time in the AHL to being a middle 6 player that you can rely on in big pressure moments. He's got the speed. He's got an improved shot and offensive skill set that, the points of production is coming. I wonder if you could slot him in on that second or third line with the Penguins. Because he is very valuable. And it's interesting that you really brought him up because I really like that possibility as well.
I like him with the Leafs, to be honest. Why not bring him back? He's a local kid. He played well. It was funny because I saw a picture of him and Auston Matthews celebrating a goal, and I was like, wait a minute, they did play together, because it kind of seems like they didn't. But he was a cap casualty that just had to get let go because of money. So he's the Leafs don't have much for bottom 6 right now. So it's going to be those, affordable contracts where it's low risk, high reward, and he fits the bill perfectly. So shout out to Connor Brown, who's going to have a lot of interest this summer.
It's interesting because at that time, everyone was saying, oh, Connor Brown is not a top 6 forward, kind of the same thing we were talking about with Alexander Kerfoot, but I thought he brought a lot more to the table in terms of speed and finishing ability. Obviously, he had a lot of shots. Maybe just conversion wasn't there, but I thought he looked more of a top 6 option than Alexander Kerfoot. It's interesting bringing up those similarities back from 2017-18 even to now. But yeah, if there's a possibility that the Maple Leafs can try and persuade Connor Brown and not go to Pittsburgh and come back to Toronto, I'm definitely on board with that.
Fair enough. Let's hope for it.
That about does it for this show. Once again, thank you for tuning in to the Maple Leafs Lounge. Be sure to check out the Hockey Writers for articles from Shane, as we mentioned one of them, and also articles from myself and the fantastic Maple Leafs crew over there, including everyone else covering their respective NHL teams over at the website. Once again, be sure to check out the amazing content we have there. We have the draft guide out as well, constantly putting out profiles, features, and everything like that leading up to the NHL draft, which is just weeks away. So be sure to tune in for a lot of great coverage there. Once again, that is all that we have for this episode. For Shane Seney, I am Peter Baracchini, and we'll see you next time on the Maple Leafs Lounge.